Well, that brings us to the Patriot Act. Now, again, I'm going to look at this. The Patriot Act seems to be your biggest source of controversy for your tenure over the DOJ. It passed the Senate 98, one no, one no vote. Passed the House 357, 66 no's, 9 no votes. Yet George Soros says you are responsible for the passage.
I don't know George Soros, and I hope, I think it was one of the more significant achievements. Mm-hmm. The fundamentals of the Patriot Act put in place in the war on terror a number of capacities that we already had for fighting organized crime. I'll give you one of them, the so-called roving wiretap. And that sounds nefarious. Sounds like a bunch of FBI agents in trench coats going out with these alligator clips and just roving around and tapping anybody's wires. The roving wiretap refers to the fact that, not that you go around and just tap anybody's phone, but instead of surveilling a specific telephone, you surveil a specific person. In antiquity, when there was a criminal investigation and the courts ordered a wiretap, they said you can tap that phone. Well, in the 1980s, the drug dealers learned that you can get these throwaway phones at the local convenience store. And they would use a phone for a week, throw it away, and before you could get another order to surveil another phone, they'd throw it away. So in the 1980s, they allowed, in cases for drug dealers and organized crime, the ability to surveil not just an instrument, not the equipment, but the communications of a person, which makes sense. Well, that had never been extended into the area of surveilling for national security. Well, it only made sense that we provide the set of tools to safeguard America that we had already provided for in the war against organized crime. Most of the Patriot Act was to do that, and if Soros says I'm responsible for it, it's the nicest thing he's ever said about me. I think it was the right thing. Now, there are some problems with it, and I've recommended that because, frankly, it's recently been abused because members of the FBI have violated the law and used their violations, trumped up evidence, and to convince the court, the FISA court, to issue authorizations to surveil various people. And the one thing about surveillance, whether it's in the criminal environment or in the terrorism environment, is that you can't tell the person you're surveilling. And I always said in the deadly game of hide and seek of terrorism, if the hiders know where the seekers are going to look, it ruins the game. I mean, you can't. Yeah. So it has to be what's called an ex parte proceeding. You can't go seek the warrant with the knowledge and awareness of the person who is the target.
Right.
And that makes it, ex parte proceedings are not favored. They shouldn't be. And yet they must be in some settings. And so I think that, if you have a proceeding where a person isn't capable of defending himself in the civil area, they appoint what's called the guardian ad litem for a child, for instance. They say, now you represent this guy and to make sure that justice is done. I think we ought to have something like that for American targets and the citizen targets of the FISA law. And they're very limited. You have to either have strong evidence that you're a foreign power or you're an agent of a foreign power before FISA applies to you. But when it's an American citizen that's a target like that, I think we ought to have someone whose responsibility it is to sort of argue the case against the warrant. The one other thing I should mention quickly, and that is that in criminal defense, if you're charged with a crime, and I as prosecutor know about evidence that would help you avoid your being called guilty, I have to give you that evidence. It's called the Brady Rule.
Okay.
And I think that ought to be clear also when you go before the FISA court. If there's exculpatory evidence that would argue against the person, like Carter Page, who was the subject of a FISA warrant. And a FISA warrant was unlawfully granted because the FBI was willing to use evidence which had been manufactured, bought and paid for by a political organization, and that should have been known to the FISA judge. I would have been furious as a FISA judge
Yeah.
if I had been deluded and tricked into issuing a warrant improperly. So I've got these proposals that would put in place safeguards against that. We should have the Brady rule, and if a person violates that rule, they should never be able to practice law before a government agency in the future, and there could be other penalties. But I've carried these things to the Congress, and they've been considered and are being considered. But that doesn't mean we can afford to be without an ability to gather information about potential attacks.
Is there any teeth in any law that punishes an agent that goes off the rails like that?
You know, we've got laws that have lots of teeth, but if we have officials that don't have backbone to prosecute them, all the teeth in the law cannot survive a rubbery backbone on the part of an administration. And when you have prosecutors that won't bring the charge or will purposely delay the charge till after the statute of limitations has run in order to accommodate the individual who violates the law, the justice system is subverted and the people of the country are betrayed. And that's something we talked about earlier.
Then we become a nation of men and not laws.
Yes, we need to be a nation of both men and laws. But the rule of law is the kind of thing that provides the great equity of opportunity.
Okay.
And when the so-called equity of outcome is a different thing. That's where everybody gets the same outcome no matter what they do, and that's the definition of socialism. And that's why people are streaming to the border south. It's our southern border because they've had enough of that. Everybody gets the same, and a lot of people want to get to an environment where you can be rewarded for. And you know, we've been a magnet for that disequity, if you will, in outcome results in different rewards. If you got a lot of merit, you get a lot. I'm so glad that Elon Musk left South Africa and came to the United States to become the richest guy in the world instead of going someplace else, because we had the environment that provided the great opportunity for reward.